الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحابته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا ما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. الحمد لله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. It's a blessing always to participate in these things, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all the people that worked very hard to put this together. The modern world is very fast, and people feel the time and the pressure of just their daily lives. It's hard to find balance in those lives, and it's a blessing to be able to remove oneself somewhat from that hustle and bustle out there, and to be in a place where there's a lot of nature and things that historically people were very connected to. I mean, there still are people connected to these things, but they're increasingly diminishing in terms of just numbers on the earth. The major cities that are emerging all over the world they're terrifying in that so many people that traditionally were living off the land and connected to the natural cycles have moved in, and we have massive slums all over the world for people that have traveled and seen some of these places. We've got about 1/4 of the Earth's population now living in really slum conditions, which was very, very different. Modern poverty is not like pre-modern poverty, because pre-modern poverty was rarely qualified with impoverishment of the soul. If any of you have been to Pakistan, a lot of you are, unfortunately, some of the really young people don't realize how much has changed just in the last 20, 30 years. Swat Valley was one of the most beautiful places in the world, and I know people that became Muslim because they visited Swat Valley. So, and the stories about just the incredible hospitality and the beauty of the people of the Swat Valley. So when you read now about what's happening in places like that, it's very disturbing. When I first went to West Africa, it was actually my second time. My first time was in 1978. But the second time that I went, Mauritania was an isolated place that had a lot of people there didn't even know about America, just that there was a country called America. I actually met people in the Saharan desert that did not know America as a place. So it was very amazing to see people that weren't just pre-modern people, but they were pre-modern people that had almost no interaction with the modern world. So you got a very different perspective on just how people viewed things. And now in Mauritania recently, there was a tourist that was killed, and even though it was very shocking for the people generally, the fact that there were some Muslim extremists that did something like that in Mauritania was like very shocking for the Mauritanians, because that type of Islam, or that manifestation of Muslim behavior, not that type of Islam, that manifestation of Muslim behavior was really unknown in that place. So it was a big shock. So things have changed, but it's very nice for us and to be able to come out here. And so I think we should do our best to take advantage of. Imam Zayd and I took a walk, and there's a place called the Baptist Vacation Bible School, and right down the road. But that was I like the name, Vacation Bible School, because vacation is from a Latin word to empty out. Vacuum comes from the same root. So vacating is emptying out. And the Salaf called it takhliya. There's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said that the Prophet emptied us out of Jahiliyyah and then he filled us of Islam. So this spiritual practice is about emptying before it's about, you have to be emptied before you can be filled. If you're already filled, in fact, most of us are full of ourselves. So that's the problem, is how do we empty our souls of ourselves, emptying the soul of the self. And that's a very difficult thing. But what's interesting is the Prophet ﷺ was, when Jibreel first met him on Jabal Nur, the Mountain of Light, he squeezed him. And some of the ulama took from that the ishara, he squeezed him 3 times. And it was actually to make sure that he was completely empty of himself before giving him the revelation. And that's why he thought that he was going to kill him, because he literally crushed his just sides. But that was a physical manifestation of a spiritual reality, because the Prophet ﷺ, in the books they always say, كَانَ يَتَحَنَّثُ, يَتَحَنَّث. And in the commentaries always say, التحنث هو تعبد. The tahannuth is a type of devotional practice. So the practice that the Prophet ﷺ was doing, the meditation that he was doing in the Ghar, Hira, there on Jabal Nur, was called tahannuth. Now we just read in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, what verse had that word in it? Anybody who is? Al-Hinth al-Azim, right? So the Hinth is in Surah Al-Waqi'ah. What does it mean in there? Al-Hinth. Anybody? Luckily you're doing Surah Al-Waqi'ah with Shaykh Yahya. So you'll know what Hinth. Hinth is shirk. So tahannuth is in the morphology of Arabic, tahannuth, one of the meanings of the tafa'ul wazn is called tafa'ul, the paradigm of tafa'ul. One of the meanings is to avoid. So you have like hujud is sleep. Tahajjud is to avoid sleep. So yatahajjad means you're struggling to avoid sleep. Tahannuth means to avoid shirk, to remove oneself from shirk. Now the greatest shirk is worship of the self. Idolatry has nothing on self-olatry, right? Really, because the worship of the self, and Allah mentions about people that take their hawa as their God, right? Ittakhadha ilahuhu hawahu, like he took as his God his desires, his self, whatever the self wants, the dictates of the self. So the emptying out of the self is necessary in order to prepare for your journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though it's part of the journey, because the journey, you have to pack before you go on a journey, right? You get your provisions ready. So the journey actually starts before you set out on the physical journey of actually moving towards your destination. There's things you have to do. So you have to get your visa if you need a visa. You have to get your tickets. You have to do all these things. So the emptying out is really the preparation to really move spiritually on the path. And that's why the Isra is such an interesting event in the Prophet ﷺ's life, because now tonight, which is 27th of Rajab, is there's nothing confirmed about Laylat al-Isra, nothing. And that's why there's no ibadah that is specific to these nights in the Sunnah. That's true. And if people say there is, it becomes a bid'ah. That is a bid'ah, to introduce things that aren't from the religion into the religion. So, but having said that, the ulama do take a blessing from the 27th of Rajab generally. I mean, a lot of the ulama say it's a good night because the majority of ulama do think that it is the night of the Isra, but Imam Nawawi did not. So even to say by kashf or something that it's this night, I don't think. Imam Nawawi was one of the great awliya of our tradition, but he did not agree with that opinion. There's nothing confirmed. But generally, it is the night, if you look on Muslim calendars, it's the night that they put for the night of the Isra. And so it's a good night to remember the Isra, just generally. The Prophet ﷺ, if you look at what happened right before the Isra was probably the most difficult time of the Prophet's life, ﷺ. They say that the darkest hour is the one right before dawn. The Prophet ﷺ had gone to Ta'if, and he had been rejected by the people of Ta'if. But worse than that, they really humiliated him. I mean, you can't humiliate in reality dignified people. It's not. But they attempted to humiliate him, because humiliation is really an internal experience more than, I mean, somebody can denigrate you, but humiliation is something you experience. I was so humiliated. People, that's what they say. So when you say he humiliated me, it's really, you're saying I allowed myself to be humiliated by him, because people can't really humiliate you. They can be disrespectful, but it says more about them than it does about you in reality. So you can allow yourself to be humiliated. Now, the Prophet ﷺ also said, "Al-mu'minu la yudhillu nafsah." A believer shouldn't ever humiliate himself. And what Sidi Ahmed Zarruq said, that it meant opposing government, like rebels and things like that. I mean, that's how he interpreted it, because he said, when you do that and then they capture you and they put you in shackles and they do all, you've become humiliated. But what Ahmed Zarruq, the Prophet said, "Al-mu'minu la yudhillu nafsahu." The believer doesn't humiliate himself, which really means that it's you that's humiliating yourself. It's not somebody else. It's you that's doing it. But you can cause yourself to be humiliated by doing stupid things. So what the Prophet ﷺ was doing was the most honorable of things. There was nothing dishonorable about it, and there was nothing that should have warranted what happened to him. Whereas when you go against a government, for instance, and oppose them, you've basically done something that justifies their response, because that's how they're going to respond. They're going to respond by humiliating you. So in essence, you've humiliated yourself by putting yourself into a position like that. So when the Prophet ﷺ went to Ta'if, he was basically looking for people to give him protection so that he could do his da'wah. And they didn't respond. But worse than that, they sent the servants out to throw rocks at him. Some of the children threw rocks at him, and he actually had, his feet were bloodied from that. And he was very distressed about it, because it was like his last hila. It was his last strategy. He was doing the asbab. Even though his trust was completely with Allah, he was doing the asbab. And that's why his dua is so interesting, because, well, there's two things that are interesting. One is who comes to him at that time when he goes to he's sitting under the tree. Who comes to him? Huh? The Christian man, Addas, and Nanawi. And where was he from? Because he asked him, "Where are you from?" What did he say? He said he was from Nineveh. And the Prophet ﷺ said, that's the city of the blessed man, Yunus ibn Metta. Now, what's interesting about that? Because this is, these are the things that God plans. I mean, what's interesting about that story? I mean, what would be interesting about a man from Nineveh coming to the Prophet ﷺ at that point? Because what's the story of Nineveh? What's the story of Nineveh? We see good, yeah. It's interesting because they disbelieved in him, but he gets fed up. See, Jonah basically writes them off and says, you know, these people, there's no real hope for them. And he goes, and then he gets on the ship, and then there's a storm, and they throw lots, and they throw him over. And then the whale comes. But the point of that story is that he was in the same situation. The Prophet was in the situation of Yunus ibn Umatta. Now what happens with Yunus in the belly? He's like, his realization is, this is all from God. I had my plan, but God had his plan. Because he was trying to get on the boat and but it didn't work out the way he thought in his mind it was going to work out, and he ends up in the belly of the whale and praising God, right? Inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Now who does he blame? Does he blame the people of Nineveh? He's in the belly of the whale. Oh Allah, look what they've done to me. Destroy these people, right? I mean, does he do that? Does he blame the people? What's he say? He blames himself. It's so interesting. You know, it's like Muslims tend to, I don't know what happened, but at a certain point they stopped reading these stories correctly or something. But he blames himself, and he says, you know, if you don't help me, I'm finished. So the fact that a man from the city of Nineveh comes to the Prophet at that time is very symbolic. And the Prophet ﷺ says his famous dua, where he says to Allah, you are the Lord of the oppressed. And he said, I don't have any strategy, you know, قَلَّتْ حِيلَتِي. I don't really have a strategy to do it. You know, I've tried everything that I can. But then he says, you know, I don't know who you're going to send me to. Is it an enemy that will treat me horribly? Or some stranger that doesn't know who I am? There's no warmth, there's no help coming from them. إِلَى مَنْ تَكِلُونِي. But then he says, you know, but if you're pleased with me, you know, if you're pleased with me, then I don't care what you do to me, as long as you're pleased with me. In other words, whatever the circumstances you put me in, I'm not going to complain about them, as long as you're... And then he said, وَالْعَافِيَةُ أَوْسَعُ. You know, the well-being is easier for me. It's easier to be in a situation where you're not in that constriction and difficulties. But what's interesting about that is he said, you know, that I ashku ilayka hawani ala nas. You know, I complain to you my insignificance in the eyes of the people. He didn't complain about how they treated him. He complained about the fact that he didn't hawani ala nas, you know, that I'm in this situation where they're not respecting me. And if you look at that, he didn't complain about the people. It's very interesting. It's very similar to what Jonah did. And one of the things the Prophet said, لا تفضلوني على الأنبياء. Do not prefer me over other prophets. And in a riwayah he said, لا تفضلوني على يونس ibn متى. Don't prefer me over Jonah. Right? Don't prefer me over Jonah. Which is from his humility, and what it means is, do not prefer the Prophet ﷺ in any way that diminishes from the other prophets. That's what it means. It's also from his humility, because he said, أَنَا سَيْدُ وَلْدِ آدَمْ وَلَا فَخْرٍ. I am the best of the children of Adam, and I'm not boasting. In other words, this is not something that I really want to tell you about me. but it's something that I was commanded to tell you. So now, and then on the way back, what happens from Ta'if? What happens on the way back? The angel comes and offers him, thank you, offers him to destroy the people. Just, he'll wipe them out for him. Now, again, here's a test of who the Prophet ﷺ is, because there's people that would do that after being humiliated like that. They're so angry. And the Prophet ﷺ said no. And what was the reason that he gave for saying no? That the children. Because as long as there's children, there's hope. Children have the purity and the fitrah and the bara'ah that makes it possible for them to be open to a message of truth. Because children by their nature are not disbelievers. Children by their nature are believers. They don't cover up the truth, children. And even really little children, when they do, they're not really covering up the truth. They're just, because they're in the imaginal world, they can make things out the way they want them. So children don't lie. Like little kids, 4-year-old, who broke the glass? You see, then the brain is like working. I don't know. Now, adults assume it's a lie, but it's not, because in that world of all possibility, there are other alternatives. Really, that's the way the child's mind is working, and that's why the 7 years is called Sinnu Tamyiz, the age of discrimination, because they can start to discriminate, but that's only the beginning. It's not complete until they're 14, 15. It's not complete. So they're in that world of possibilities. So the Prophet ﷺ wanted good for them. Maybe they won't believe, but their children will believe. That's what he hoped. And that's what that was what Jonah learns, because he goes back to Nineveh. And that's why it's not, you don't decide these things. لَيْسَ لَكَ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ شَيْءٍ. This isn't about you. That Allah said that to the Prophet ﷺ when he wanted to take revenge on the Quraysh. Allah said, this isn't about you. In other words, it's not about the self. It's not about this. This is something much bigger. And after that, the Prophet ﷺ would mention on the mimbar, because he swore an oath when he saw Hamza mutilated. And that's his humanity. The Prophet was a human being. He got angry. He said, if you ever hear me curse anybody, he said, I'm a man and I get angry. But the angels will turn my curse into a prayer for that person. So even if the Prophet got angry, his reality was rahmah. And so whatever his human nature was manifesting, his reality was all mercy. Abu Abbas al-Mursi said all of the prophets were created from the mercy of God, but the Prophet is Ainur Rahmah. He's the essence of mercy. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We only sent you as a mercy to all the world. And so when he goes back to the second thing that happens is he meets the jinn, right? And some of them, they heard the Quran, إِنَّا سَمِعْنَا قُرْآنًا عَجَبًا يَهْدِي إِلَى الرُّشْدِ فَآمَنَّا بِهِ. They heard the Quran and they heard it calling to guidance, and they believed in it. So the unseen world. I mean, Yusuf, I don't know if people heard Yusuf. Islam wrote a really nice song recently. Every pearl drop in the sky knows about you. It's a song he wrote about the Prophet's life. It was a very beautiful song. But the fish in the sea, every fish in the sea knows about you. And that's the thing about the Prophet ﷺ, is that even the rocks were greeting him. And so he was in this, I mean, we couldn't even imagine what that state would be like, to where things, you know, even though humans are negating you, the clouds are covering you. I mean, people saw that. Bahira, the monk, the Christian monk, saw the cloud moving with the caravan. And Maysara saw that. Maysara went to Khadija and he said, the whole time he said there was a cloud covering him. And if I've ridden in the desert, like I got sunstroke on a camel because I rode for about 8 hours once and I literally got sunstroke. So it would have been nice to have a cloud over, but you know, ma minna illa lahu maqamun ma'loom. So this سريت من حرم ليلا إلى حرم كما سرى البدر في داج من الظلم. Imam al-Busiri says that you moved across from one haram, one sanctuary, to another sanctuary, just like the full moon moves in the darkness of the night across the sky. And that is reference to his night journey, which is called the Isra. And then there's the Mi'raj. The Mi'raj is the Ascension. So there's a difference between the Isra and the Ascension. The Isra is by consensus. It's mujma' alayh. You have to believe in it. It's in the Quran. Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi laylan. Glory be to the one who took his servant by night in the night. It's re-emphasized, and the ulama differ about why, because Sara is to travel at night in the Arabic language. And Asra is somebody to take you by night. Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi laylan ila al-masjid ila al-masjid al-haram ila al-masjid al-aqsa. That took you from the sanctuary in Mecca to the sanctuary. There's a Hebrew out there that says Baytuha Makdish. If you go out there, right? Ha in Hebrew is like al in Arabic, the. So they call it Bayt al-Maqdis as well. In Hebrew, it's Baytuha Makdish. There's a thing right out there on the wall. So this was a sanctuary for the Jews, obviously, before the Prophet's ummah took that place. لِيُظْهِرُهُ عَلَى دِينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. So that you have to believe in. Now, whether it was in the body or whether it was a vision or that, there's a khilaf. The dominant opinion of the ulama is that it was the bodily, the first part. The second part, the mi'raj, cannot be a physical journey. It's yastahilu, and that's all of our ulama, with the exception of the mujassima, the anthropomorphists, which is a very small group. But all of the ulama agree that when فَدَنَا فَتَدَلَّى كَانَ قَابَ قَوْسِينَ أَوْ أَدْنَى, that when he got close to Allah and was brought near and was 2 bows length, which is a metaphor, because in the Arabian tradition, if you came into the presence of a king, you could not come closer than 2 bows length. That was the closest that you were allowed to get to the king. And so that was an honorific expression of how close the Prophet got to God, as close as you can get to a king without breaching the adab. So, but that denu is denu maqam la makan. It's a denu of station, not of place. It's really important. So people should not think that there's any physicality there. You don't go into the physical presence of God, because God does not have physicality. But the Isra is mujma' alayh. If you reject the Isra, you're rejecting Nas al-Quran. And generally it was considered, you're just out of Islam if you reject the Isra. But obviously, if somebody doesn't believe in the bodily journey, that's not disbelief. Qat'iyad, the ulama say, yufassaqu wa yubadda'u. They're considered mubtadi' and fasiq, but it's not out of Islam. So it's an innovative belief. So so he says that Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The benefit, one of the benefits of mentioning that in the verse in the Quran, Subhanalladhi asra bi abdihi, by saying laylan, is that it was a journey that took the Arabs about 30 nights to make that journey from Mecca. So it was re-emphasizing that it was in one night. And Ibn Mas'ud has a qira'ah that said ba'd al-layl, some of the night. So it was a portion of the night, because the Prophet ﷺ, and the hadith that Aisha relates, even though she was not married to the Prophet at the time, but she might have heard that from somebody who was there, was that his bed was still warm by the time that he got back. So the journey was, obviously it's a metaphysical journey in that it was not in the normal time, space continuum that we're in. It was in, and now, I mean, they have, you know, in modern physics, they have things like wormholes, you know, where you can be in one part of the universe and go through a wormhole and you're instantaneously in another part of the universe. So these ideas at that time, the buraq, which is from a root word barq, which is lightning, and is like the speed of light. The buraq was moving at, because it went from one horizon to the other in one step. So it's instantaneous traveling. But the Prophet ﷺ, what's intriguing now is that these things are just common. To go from Mecca to Syria, you know, or from Jeddah to Syria, it takes you 40 minutes or something by airplane. So it's just not, you know, at that time it sounded completely just, and some people lost their faith. There were people that literally it was too much. But Abu Bakr said, I think, the best thing about it, because when they came to him, and the Quraysh were really happy about this, because they thought they're not going to buy this. So they went to Abu Bakr and they said, did you hear what your companion's saying that he did? And he said, no, what did he do? And he says he went to Jerusalem last night and came back, a journey that takes us a month. And Abu Bakr said, in qalahu faqad sadaq. If he did indeed say that, in other words, I don't necessarily trust you, but if he did indeed say that, I believe him. And they said, you believe him that he could do that? He said, I believe him in something more extraordinary than that he's getting revelation from God. I mean, that's what's really, I mean, once you believe that, then everything becomes possible within that. Because that's the really challenging thing, the idea of, you know, God communicating to a human being. But once you accept that, everything else becomes very, very... That's what's so interesting about prophets, is why do people believe them? People don't believe mad people. I mean, you get cults. You know, like you can have a small cult of people that believe in something. But when you get these manifestations that huge numbers of people believe in, and that's why it's one of the proofs of the prophets is their acceptance. You know, the acceptance of these great numbers of people for what they're telling. So the other thing that happens, which is interesting, is he sees Musa alayhi salam in al-Bukhari. He sees him praying at Kuthban al-Ahmar, at the place in Sinai, in his grave, which is a proof of the Ahl Sunnah that the prophets are alive in their graves. So people that say the prophet's dead, he died a physical death, but the prophets are not dead. None of the prophets are dead. The prophets are alive. The shuhada are alive. Right? And then he met the other prophets. So if they were dead, how did he meet them? because that's all Sahih Hadith. Like he met, first of all, he met them at the Bayt al-Maqdis, at the Masjid al-Aqsa. And they asked him to lead the prayer. In fact, Ibrahim alayhi salam, when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, أثنى الأنبياء على الله وكنت مثنيا. They were praising God and I was praising God. And one of the things that he said was, Alhamdulillah, Subhanaka, Ahmaduka, I'm praising you. And then he said, you made me a mercy to all the worlds. And Ibrahim said, Bihada fadilta alayna. By this, you have this preference. Is that your rahmah extends to all the worlds. And that's when they asked him to lead the prayer. So he led the prayer. And his heart, according to one riwayah, was washed also again at that point. There's 3 riwayah that the heart was washed. Now, the physical washing of his heart that took place when he was just a few years old. He was a little boy they were playing. He was playing with his nurse, his brother in nursing, أخوه في الرضاعة. And the little boy saw the 2 angels came and شق صدره, and he ran to tell Halima Sa'diyah what had happened. But what's interesting about that story is, again, it was something, the idea of taking a heart out and washing the heart, and was something just beyond imagination at that time. It's something that happens every day in our civilization. I mean, this is one of the things that سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقِّ. We will continue to show them our signs until it becomes clear. But if you look at what happened, his heart was put into a basin of ice, which is what you do when you take a heart out. They put it on, they put it in some cool temperature to slow down the metabolic rate so that the cells don't die. And then they pour over a cryonic fluid, which is high in potassium and calcium and electrolytes. So they have electrolytic fluid that they pour over, which is what the angels did according to the riwayah. They're pouring over the Zamzam, which is very salty water, over the heart. And then they put it back in his chest. But the Sahaba said that they saw the scar. Like, if you've ever seen anybody that's had open heart surgery, they have that very scar. They saw a fine scar down the front of his chest from the splitting of the chest. So that occurred, and according to the hadith, he was washed. The tas that they used, every prophet had their heart washed. All the prophets had their heart washed. And that tas, the original tas, was the same one. It's always used, the same one. So their hearts are all washed in the same. Now, the other thing that is لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَةِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى. He saw these great signs of his Lord. And the Prophet ﷺ, as he was moving, when the Mi'raj began, which is the ascension. Mi'raj means ladder in Arabic. Uruj is to ascend. When he was ascending, and you have Jacob's ladder in the Bible, which is like a Mi'raj, where he has the ladder up to the heavens. So when he was ascending, he was seeing all these extraordinary things, like the unseen was opening up completely. But the Quran says, مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ وَمَا طَغَى. His eye didn't deviate. His eye didn't swerve. He didn't look at all. He was focused completely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ultimately that, he's done the journey that everybody makes, the journey to their Lord. Everybody's on a journey to their Lord. You either do it wittingly or willingly, or you do it unwillingly. But everybody is headed to God. And so the Prophet ﷺ, the Isra is really, it is the story of Islam, in that it is the purpose of of this teaching, and that's why what is the essential thing that happens on the Isra and the Mi'raj? What's the prayer? I mean, that's what he was given. He was given the prayer, and also the affirmation from the other prophets, because he meets Adam in the first heaven. He meets Yusuf in the second heaven. He meets Isa in the third heaven. He meets Harun, Idris in the fourth heaven. He meets Harun in the fifth. He meets Musa in the sixth. And then he meets Ibrahim alayhi salam. And he told the Sahaba what each one of them looked like in relation to people they knew. So he said, he looks like so. And then he said about Ibrahim, he said, Huwa ashbahu bi sahibikum. He looks most like your companion, meaning himself. But and then each one of the prophets affirmed him and prayed and for his help. And this is called, some of the ulama say that this is the Rafiq al-A'la. You know, some say it refers to Allah, al-Mala al-A'la, you know, the highest, because the Prophet, when he died, that's what he was saying, the highest companionship, which is Allah, but it's also the company of the prophets. And so they affirmed, all of them affirmed what he was teaching, because the Prophet never saw himself outside of their teaching. He was not bringing anything new. He was not a bid'ah min ar-rusul, and he wasn't an innovator from the messengers. Everything, and that's why, you know, people say, oh, you know, he got these stories from the Bible. Right? I mean, there's the Orientalists have said that, but if you look, it's very interesting how consistently the Quran avoids all of these things in the Bible that are in the Bible, like in the stories. You know, they complained to the Prophet that the Quran was not linear. You know, they said that it's not like a story, and that's when Surah Yusuf came down. Like, we can do that. You know, we've already done that before, you know, because the Bible's like that, but the Quran is not like that. But Allah, when they said to him that it wasn't like anything they'd heard before, it didn't have a narrative, it didn't have like a traditional beginning, a middle, and an end. That's when the Yusuf came down. It's like, there you go. That's possible, because they complained. Some of the people said they wanted stories, qasas. And that's when that's possible. But the Quran it's very different from any previous dispensation, but it's not teaching different things. It's teaching the same things. And that's why it's a very interesting, it has Old Testament elements, but then it's got New Testament elements. It's not fixed in one or the other perspective. Although, if anything, it inclines more towards Isa's approach to things. I mean, if you look at the ayahs that deal with justice, and they're always followed up by ayahs of forgiving and overlooking, and it's a higher thing. And that's why the Prophet was commanded to do those things, even though his ummah is not commanded. They can redress wrongs if they want to, but he was obligated to forgive. And that's why مَن لَمْ يَنْتَقِمْ لِنَفْسِهِ قَطْ. He never took vengeance or any revenge for himself ever. وَمَا كَانَ يَدْفَعْ السَّيَّةَ بِالسَّيَّةِ وَلَكِنْ يَعْفُو وَيَغْفِرُ. Like in the Hilya, it says he never returned a wrong with another wrong, but he used to forgive and overlook. So and then the other thing that's very interesting about you know, in Imam al-Busiri's Burda, when he talks about the Isra, he says, وَبِتَّ تَرْقَى إِلَىٰ أَنْ نِلْتَ مَنْزِلَةً مِنْ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ لَمْ تُدْرَكْ وَلَمْ تُرَمِ. You know, you continued to go up in rank until you got to Qaba Qawsayn, this rank of 2 bows lengths that had never been achieved before. Even Jibreel had to stop and let him go. And then, but what's very interesting, you know, وَقَدَّمَتْكَ جَمِيعَ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ بِهَا وَالرُّسُلُ تَقْدِيمًا مَخْدُومًا عَلَى خَدَمِ. And all the prophets, they put you forward. And he says, وأنت تخترق السبع الطباق بهم في موكب كنت فيه صاحب العالم, and you broke through the 7 heavens with them in a procession. You were the standard bearer in that procession of all these prophets. But then what he says, which is very interesting, he says, بشرى لنا معشر الإسلام, right? فحزت كل فخار غير مشترك وجزت كل مقام غير مزدحم. MashaAllah. It's a very beautiful section of the Burda. The Prophet ﷺ said, Ibn Abbas relates, he said, علمني ربي ليلة الإسراء علوم شتى. That my Lord taught me many knowledges on the night of the Isra. And but then he says, بشرى لنا معشر الإسلام إن لنا من العناية ركنا غير منهدم لما دعا الله داعين لطاعته بأكرم الرسل كنا أكرم الأمم. When he says, after he talks about the Isra, Imam al-Busayri says, what good news we have, O people of submission, because we have a providential care, a pillar of support that can never be destroyed, this pillar of the Prophet ﷺ. And then he says, when God called his Prophet and said, O best of messengers, by that we became the best of Ummam. What's really interesting, I just want to read you this because I thought this was so extraordinary. لما كان في قوله من العناية إيهام ودعوة من غير دليل فسر ذلك أو ذكر دليل فسر ذلك أو ذكر دليله بقوله لما دعا الله يعني لما سمى الله نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم الذي هو داعينا لطاعته جل وعلا بأكرم الرسل. لازم من ذلك أن كنا نحن الذين هم أمته أكرم الأمم عنده جل وعلا، لأن أكرم الرسل لم يبعث إلا إلى أكرم الأمم، فجميع من بعث إليهم خير الأمم، مؤمنهم خير المؤمنين وكافرهم خير الكافرين. I mean, I just thought that was so amazing. قال تعالى وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. So he says that when Imam al-Busayri says that God called the one who called us to his obedience by the best of messengers, we then must be the best of nations, because that's his dalil, that the fact that he's akram al-rusul makes kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. But then he says that the believers of this ummah are the best believers and the kafirun are the best kafirun, which is very interesting to me, because if you look, never in history have there been so many people that are espousing the truths that the Prophet ﷺ was espousing at a time when nobody had articulated those things. Like the Prophet is the first, there's no human being that I've ever seen in history, in all the readings I've done, and I've asked people to show me, I've never seen anybody make the remark about human equality that the Prophet ﷺ made. I don't find anywhere in human history anybody that said there is no preference of a white man over a black man, or a black man over a white man, or an Arab over a non-Arab, or a non-Arab over an Arab, except in piety. I haven't found anything that even comes close to that in really attacking racism at its root. And that now has become, people that don't even believe in God have come to accept that as a truth, whereas that was not widely acknowledged at all. In fact, it wasn't really acknowledged. Superiority was a common belief in the pre-modern world of tribal, racial, religious superiority, whatever. And also women's rights, just the elevation of women, the abolition of slavery. I mean, all of these things that have happened in this, which is very clear that it's like his ummah is not just the people that believe in him, but it's all the people of the world that are in existence after he comes into the world. So we believe they're the ummah because the ummah is divided into ummatul da'wah wa ummatul istijaba. The ummah of da'wah, the ummah of invitation, people that are invited to the Prophet ﷺ to accept him, to believe in him, and then the people that answer that invitation, because people have a choice. And even that, la ikraha fid din, right? I mean, before the Prophet ﷺ, religion was about coercion, right? People were forced to believe in things that they didn't necessarily want to believe in once people got into power. So if you look at religious traditions, once they got into power, rarely do you find in human history religions that were tolerant of other religions. And the Muslims have their blemishes. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But in terms of the pre-modern world, they have by far the best record of any civilization. But the moderns have become more tolerant. I mean, there's nothing in human history that parallels Western tolerance, post-Enlightenment tolerance of religions. Nothing. Which is quite extraordinary because, I mean, to me it's proof of what, because this Imam, I mean, he was writing over 100 years ago, but I just thought that was very interesting that he said that even the people that don't believe in him are the best of those times. Isn't that an interesting point? I mean, I just thought that was so interesting to me. Alhamdulillah. So what time does the Isha come in? What time is it now? 9:54. All right. So does anybody have any question? Yeah, I think Europe's they're struggling a lot with Islam. Because the thing about Europe, unlike America, Europe has largely abandoned religion. I mean, they really see religion as a very backward thing. It's something that it's almost an embarrassment to many modern Europeans. I mean, there's still Christians and believers in Europe, but generally they're very I mean, the burqa issue is a classic issue in France of, you know, pourquoi no burqa? Right? You know, I mean, why not let, if a woman wants to cover her face, why not let, I mean, they let you go to a plastic surgeon and rearrange your face. I mean, there's no laws against that. It's amazing. And there's some faces out there that I think it'd be a social service to cover them. So, I don't know, you know, that's a real problem. It's a problem. It's very interesting. I mean, why there is that split. But generally the problem with human rights is there's no ground for them. You know, secularity is not a grounds for human rights. Secularity is about power. It's not, you know, the Germans argued that Jews were not worthy of, you know, they were just subhuman. And from a secular point of view, if you don't have any grounds for, then that argument is as valid as any other argument in terms of power. And that's why Göring at the Nuremberg trials, Göring said, you know, he refused to even partake in it. He just said, this is about power. He said, we were in power, now you're in power. So you're dictating to us just like we dictated before. And that, without religion, things are about power. So even human rights, you know, we frame things in human rights, but what human rights did the Iraqis have when they were bombed? You know, I mean, that's just power. So you can say wonderful things about human rights, which, you know, Europe and America do. They say wonderful things. And a lot of people generally believe these things. But in the end, the people in power behave according to power. They don't behave according to human rights. It's about power. And so the only time that these things are really truly meaningful is when you bring in the sacred, and rights become grounded in divine rights, not human rights, divine rights. That these are divine rights, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created people and gave them dignity, irrespective of their religion. Humans have dignity. That لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam. We have ennobled and dignified the children of Adam. Every human being has dignity, and that's an Islamic belief. And the Prophet ﷺ taught that when he stood up for the Jew in the funeral, when they were bringing the Jew by. And this was a time when the Muslims and the Jews were at it. They weren't, it wasn't a peaceful time. But when the funeral came by, the Prophet stood up, and one of the Sahaba said, "It's a Jew." It's in Sahih al-Bukhari. And it's sad how some of the commentators try to erase that meaning, by giving, really, I think, just really crazy interpretations. But the Prophet said, "Awalaysat nafsa," isn't it a soul? And that's why the ulama that I think got it right said he stood up to acknowledge a soul returning to its Lord, irrespective of what the persona, because religion is personality, right? Islam, we're Muslims, alhamdulillah, but who's really a Muslim? The haqiqah of Islam, the reality of Islam is very different from the sociological box that you check when it asks you what religion you adhere to. You put your little box there. But are you, hal antum muslimun? Allah says that to the Muslims. Are you Muslims? And that question is about your haqiqah. It's not about outward forms. There's lots of people, everybody can perform the outward things of Islam. You can pray, you can fast, you can pay your zakat, you can do all those things. But is your inner reality a Muslim reality, which is a human being in total submission to the divine will? That's another thing. And that's why religion is more about personality than reality. So when I say I'm a Muslim, or you say you're a Muslim, you're talking about a certain set of social circumstances and a certain set of outward practices that you might or might not adhere to. If it's social circumstances, you're a Muslim because you were born in Karachi. And there's a lot of people, that's the extent of their Islam. They were born in Cairo and they were told they're Muslims, and that was it. But they haven't really ever entered into a state of real Islam with their Lord. And then there's most of us who are struggling with that, like that wonderful title to that book, Struggling to Surrender. Because it is a struggle to surrender to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet was honoring the soul stripped of the personality. Because the Jew is the personality, the Muslim is the personality, the Christian is the personality. And these personalities, we had an experience down here. I was with my wife and we went down here, and these guys were, I thought, downright belligerent, But the point is, whatever upset them, whether it was my wife's hijab or whatever, or they thought we were Muslims and I'm supposed to have angry feelings towards Muslims, or I'm supposed to have angry feelings towards Jews because right now Palestine and Israel's a mess. Do you know what I mean? So I'm supposed to have these feelings towards these people but in the end of the day, if you just strip away that personality, they're just flesh and blood. We're flesh and blood. They have souls. We have souls, right? And that, trying to get to that is such a hard place to get to. And that's where the Prophet was at, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He did not see people as evil. He saw people as divine potential. When he looked at people, he saw their potential. And that's why if you look in the verse in Surah An-Nahl, it ends with this, the bee, which is so beautiful that the Quran has, the mushrikun said, what is this book? It has Ankabut and Nahl and Namal, like ants and, and spiders, and They just thought that was so strange. And bees. But now we know what these things are. Spiders. They're controlling all the, we have a room filled with flies without spiders. It's all, they're doing this. And then bees are pollinating they're pollinating all the food. Most of the food we eat is pollinated by bees. But at the end, if you say, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah," call to the way of your Lord with wisdom, wal mu'idat al hasana, and exhort them in a beautiful way. Don't be harsh. لو كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفضوا من حولك. If you were hard and harsh-hearted, people would flee from around you. So it says, call with wisdom and with a goodly exhortation. And then it says, وَجَادِرْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and debate with them in the best way, in the most beautiful way. And then it says that إِنَّ رَبَّكَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ ضَلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. Your Lord knows who's guided, and He knows who's astray, right? In other words, just call to your Lord. Don't assume that you know who you're talking to. Don't assume that this person's a kafir, which is why the ta'yin al-kufr is haram in Sharia. Ta'yin al-kufr is haram. The ulama say that. This is in the books of Aqidah. You cannot say that an individual is a kafir. Because kafir, you're saying that they're mukhallid fil nar, right? That they're hellbound. And you can't say that about anybody. So you can talk about, these people kuffar, but specific people, you don't know what people's reality is. And that's what da'wah is about. But then, when aqabtum fa'aqibu bimithli ma uqibtum bih. If you have to redress wrongs, redress them in the best, in the most just way. Don't transgress. When you redress, don't transgress. So if somebody kills you, don't go kill their cousin. So if somebody kills one of your tribe members, right? So if one Hindu kills a Muslim, you don't go out and find any Hindu to kill them, right? There's people that do that. One part of the group does something to another part, so they go find anybody from that group. That's transgression. This is not justice, that's vengeance. There's a difference between justice and vengeance. And then it says, وَلِن صَبَرْتُ لَهُ خَيْرُ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. But if you're patient, it's better to show patience. It's better than redressing the wrong, than going out. But then it says, وَاصْبِرْ. You be patient. So like the ummah, it said, if you want to redress your wrongs, do it, but be just in it. But it's better to be patient. But then it says, but you, Prophet ﷺ, you have to be patient. You don't have an option here. Because he's the exemplar, and the exemplar has to embody the highest example. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he looked at people, he did not look at them with contempt. Nobody. He had no contempt for people. He had no kibr. There was no pride in his heart. When the man said to him, he asked him about the sandals, and he said, I love to wear nice sandals, and I like a nice shirt. Is that arrogance? The Prophet said, Inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal. God is beautiful, and He loves beauty. In other words, the thing that you love, the fact that you like beautiful sandals, what you really love is the thing that Allah loves. You love that attribute of that thing that is a reflection of a divine attribute, which is beauty, that Allah is beautiful. So when you love beauty, you're loving the reflection, the divine reflection of God's beauty in the world. That's what you're really attracted to. And he was acknowledging that that's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, because Allah loves that thing. That's why He made that thing. That's why He brought beauty into the world, because Allah is beautiful. And your acknowledgement of that beauty is your recognition of that attribute in the world. That's what you're attracted to. It's the beauty of Allah that's manifesting in that thing. That's what you're attracted to. But then he explained what kibr was, what arrogance was. He said, وَلَكِنَّ الْكِبْرِ بَطْرُ الْحَقِّ وَغَمْطُ النَّاسِ. Arrogance is to reject the truth when it's presented to you, and it's to have contempt for people. People. Nas. People. Is to have contempt for people. Alhamdulillah. It was called Al-Kuthban Al-Ahmar. It's in Sahih Al-Bukhari. It's in Sinai. And it was only described as the red dune. Like there was a dune over it. Like a red sand. Did I answer that? Or not? Somebody sent something up, I think. Where is Nineveh in the modern world? Nineveh is Mosul in Iraq. It's having a lot of trouble right now. Yeah, Nineveh. I heard it from a well-known Shaykh that Allah has made it forbidden for the earth to take the bodies of the prophets and that their flesh is still fresh in their graves. How is this supposed to be understood? Well, I mean, first of all, it's a hadith. The Prophet said, "Al-ardu la ta'kulu ajsad al-anbiya." The earth doesn't eat the prophets. But that's a Catholic belief as well. I mean, the Catholics actually, one of the signs of sanctification is that the bodies aren't. They're called incorrigibles, and the Vatican is filled with those bodies from saints that. There was an interesting article in Discovery about they let scientists go in and examine the bodies in the Vatican, and it's worth reading the article because a couple of the scientists just were flabbergasted. So a lot of the bodies were actually mummified because the popes would they'd be a little worried that they would get their flesh would get corrupted, so they'd make sure that they were mummified afterwards, but some of them weren't. And there was one 5th century saint who's like a patron saint of prostitutes. She was a prostitute that had Toba and she became a saint. But one of the scientists just said that he was just amazed at the preservation of the body. He just, it really floored him. Now I saw, when I was 12 years old, and I went to a Greek Orthodox summer camp in Greece. We visited the island of Zakynthos, and there was Saint George, right? Who I wonder if it's a youre in the story of the Prophet where they built the church for him. But we saw his body, which is open to air. It's completely intact. I mean, I saw that with my own eyes. So, incorrigibles they exist in the world. There's bodies that have not, and they're not mummified. There's bodies that were mummified, but there's also bodies that just have not been eaten by the earth. So that's not a that's a reality that's even accepted by the secular world. I mean, they have their explanations for it. They think it was that article talks about why they think they were preserved, but still they're preserved. They're there for people to see. Even Medgar Evers, when they exhumed his body in 1992, I think, he was killed in 62, 61. When they exhumed his body in 1992, it was completely intact. So, Medgar Evers, a civil rights activist. Yeah, he was shot in the back. Oh, which book I was just reading from? This book is a commentary of the Burda by an Egyptian Shaykh named Hassan al-Adawi al-Hamzawi. It's a Sharh al-Burda al-Busiriya. Yeah, it's very interesting. Somebody gave it to me a couple months ago. or last month. Could you please clarify what you said about the Mi'raj being a vision for the Prophet? Does this mean that his seeing the other prophets and being in the divine presence and receiving the prayer was not in his physical body? No, he was definitely in his physical body when he met the prophets. Also, the ascent through, he did go through, the malakut is different from the mulk, and I don't know, the mulk is what we're in here. This is the mulk. The malakut is it's the realm of the angels, and then you have the jabarut. So there are different realms, and the realms are not the same. Like we're in a fixed physical world where time space affects us. I'll bump into the wall, I'll hurt myself, but there's other worlds that are very different from this world. And the Prophet ﷺ entered in to those worlds. Now, we don't know I don't know what to tell you about it other than it's not like here. But the entering into the divine presence was not physical by consensus. That's just anybody that tells you that was a physical thing was not. Now, what was it? I don't know. I can't tell you what it was, but the reason the ulama reject the physicality of entering into the divine presence is because it necessitates certain beliefs that are impossible. Yastahilu ala Allah. One of them is that Allah is in a physical place. God cannot be in a physical locality, because if he was in a physical locality, that means he's mutahayyiz. In other words, something's around him. There's something outside of him, which is impossible, because la hududa lahu. Imam al-Tahawi says he has no limits. God is infinite. Finitus means like a limit, an end. Infinite, without end. So Allah is without limits, so he cannot be contained. And therefore, to enter into the divine presence, we don't know what that means. I can't tell you what that means. We're all going to experience it, so we just have to wait for that. But it's going to happen, and we believe we're going to see God, but not with the physical eye, not with Ayn al-Faniya, with Ayn al-Baqiya, with the eternal eye, the eye that is able to witness the divine reality. So. And the ulama say it's bila ihata, you don't see God in any ihata sense. It's beyond comprehension. Ma la aynun ra'at. If Jannah is what the eye has never seen, wala udhunun sami'at, and no ear has ever heard, wala khatara ala qalbi bashar, and it never occurred to the human being. That's Jannah. So what is God? If that's just Jannah, that's God's creation, what is God? Because Jannah is what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what never occurred to the human heart. So when God is, العجز عن إدراكه إدراكه والخوض في كنه الإله إشراكه. Sayyidina Abu Bakr said, our inability to understand God is our understanding of God, and to speak about the essence of God is to fall into shirk. Well, because language is limited. When we speak in language, even language, most of language is metaphor, even though we don't think about it. Most of language. When we speak, we're using metaphors constantly, but we don't think about them as metaphors, because language is symbolic. Language is expressing things that are not really language, right? When I talk to you about... I saw a beautiful tree today. All right, you know what a tree is, but there's a whole branch of philosophy that argues there's no such thing as a tree. Because no tree is like any other tree. So is there a category of trees in reality? And we're just lumping them all together because they look alike. I mean, that's what we do with humans, right? But is there really something called humanity? There's a whole bunch of individuals out there, but can we lump us all together and call us humanity? Because that's a category, but it's language. It's limited. So all of language has its really gross limitations in expression of how we're going to talk about things. And that's why so much of this is metaphor. It's just the nature of language and reality. And when you talk about God, I mean, you know, Rumi says Rumi says theologians are like chaperones. They're just there to make sure nothing haram happens with the lover and the beloved, you know. But you know, in the end of the day, the Prophet ﷺ, you know, he was in a state of divine witnessing, mushahada. You know, I mean, Sayyidina Ali said, "I never saw anything except I saw Allah before it, in it, and after it." I mean, he didn't mean that physically that he saw God, but he saw whatever tajalli was there, he saw it. Because the tajalliyat are, you know, what they call theophanies in English. You know, a theophany is like in Arabic it's called a tajalli, which is how God expresses himself in the world. It's a manifestation of the divine in the world. The world is not the divine, but the world cannot exist without the divine. It's the mirror, yeah, and we're the pupil. We, you know, God is contemplating himself through us, but that, you know, there's no, we're not God. I mean, that's, alhamdulillah, we're not pantheists or panentheists or, you know, but we do believe that language is limited, you know, and that's why, you know, the Quran has so many meanings. It's just endless meanings because of the nature of language. And the Quran is the richest language. And anybody who really studies the Arabic language will increasingly realize that about the Quran. You know, there's just endless possibilities. So, but the point is that that rejection of physicality, even though the language yuhim, وَكُلُّ نَصٍ أَوْهَمَ التَّشْبِيهَ أَوِّلْهُ وَنَزِّهْ وَرُمْ تَنْزِيهَا أَوِّلْهُ فَوَّضْ وَرُمْ تَنْزِيهَا. You know, every text that in any way indicates anthropomorphism, either interpret it metaphorically, which is the opinion of later mutakallimun. The earlier opinion, which I think is the soundest, and that's the one I prefer, is fawwid. You know, just leave it to God. Don't say you know what it means. Just, it doesn't mean what it appears to mean, which is called ta'wil ijmali as opposed to ta'wil tafsili. Alaikum assalam.
I live in the Emirates, and I don't want to make a generalization, but I often, especially like at work, will hear like troubling racist comments from Muslims.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't know how to deal with it because it's so troubling. And
Yeah.
I'll try to comment back or things like that. Sometimes I get looks like I'm strange or you don't understand. And sometimes I have the feeling that maybe I should just let them be. I don't really know how to deal with it.
Well, yeah, racism is a major human problem, you know, still. And Muslims are certainly not exempt from racism. There's different types of racism in the Muslim world than, say, in the West. I mean, Muslims have never had really a color racism. It's much more about tribe and clan and family and, you know. And also now, like, for instance, the Arabs, some of the Arabs might look down on, say, Pakistanis or South Asians, but there was a time when it was quite the opposite. You know, I mean, the South Asians were up on the top. And then again, that's about power, and that's the nature of the world, and that's why the world is a kind of uninteresting place from that perspective, because so much of the world is about power. And that's why, like, Bernie Madoff is such a wonderful gift to humanity, you know, because Bernie Madoff, to me, once you understand Bernie Madoff, you can never take the world seriously. You know, because Bernie Madoff he was the head of several charitable foundations. You know, he was lecturing on ethics. He was the head of Yeshiva Business School, and he stole their whole endowment. And he had plaques of honors. I mean, that's the world. The world will honor the most dishonorable and contemptible people, because the world is about appearances and not about reality. And it's very easy to fool people in the world, because people are generally naive and they're generally simple. And that's why the venal people and the worst types of people in the world get along very well in the world. You know, for however long they get along. I mean, Bernie did quite well for quite some time, and his wife even got off with, I think, $2.5 million or something, but she didn't know anything about it, of course. I mean, that he'd stole $60 billion. I mean, my wife knows everything about everything I make and everything. So, and he had one accountant. He had one CPA. I mean, that's a lot. And that CPA didn't know anything about it either. He was shocked as everybody else. Bernie's sons were shocked, even though he set them up in business. Everybody's shocked. All of Bernie's best friends, one of his closest friends said, "I can't believe it. He was one of the nicest guys I ever knew." You know, I mean, that's just dunya. So, you know, at a certain point, I mean, the thing about it is, and this is it, I'm going to tell you the truth. You're a young man, like I've been around long enough to know something. We're aliens. Really, this is not our planet. We're just here for a short time. It's like a prison that you've been put in, and behave well and you'll get off with good behavior. Really, just behave well, but ignore the other inmates. Really, because it's crazy. And there's a lot of nutcase people out there. And prison makes people mad in some ways. Do you know? So you just have to, you know, Imam Malik said, and this is one of my favorite statements that I've ever heard, and this is worth the whole sitting through this whole lecture for this, really, it is. Imam Malik said, I knew a people, adraktu qawman, you know, I experienced a people who had no faults, and they preoccupied themselves with faults of others, and God gave them faults. And he said, and I knew another people who had faults, and they preoccupied themselves with purifying their faults and ignored the faults of others, and God removed their faults. So I think the best thing for you is not to be that, and to just be the witness. You know, we're shuhada ala nas. That's what the Quran told us to be, witnesses unto mankind. And if you're really a true witness, then you don't reflect that. If other people reflect that, there's nothing you can do about that other than be a true witness to somebody who is not a racist or who's not and just watch yourself. Because we all have it. I mean, there's people, you know, there's been sociological studies of white people in this culture where they've had them interview different people with the same degrees and everything, but they'd have a black and a Hispanic and a white, and their syntax would change. When they were talking with the black people, their syntax would change because there's just sociological assumptions that are really hard to break in people. So racism is very subtle, and it manifests in a lot of different ways, and everybody's carrying around baggage. And everybody's had their time at being on top. You know, the blacks have been on top in human history. You know, the Arabs were on top in human history. The whites were on the bottom for a long time, and the Irish still are. So, you know, their time will come. George Bernard Shaw said, I want to be in Ireland when the end of time comes because everything happens 50 years later in Ireland. Alhamdulillah. It's time for Isha, I think, huh? Is that right? Yeah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. الحمد لله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.